We love talking about price targets, Bitcoin going to 200, 300,000 US dollars, maybe even in 2027. We love talking about strategy and what they're doing. Underneath everything, there is the Bitcoin network. And that's why, even if you just hold strategy, even if you just hold Bitcoin on an exchange, one thing is for certain: Bitcoin has to stay decentralized and secure. Otherwise, everything else is falling. And there's currently a civil war. This episode is important to each and every person that holds Bitcoin. Enjoy. What do you think is the current state for Bitcoin network, the health state of the miners, all the things that you kind of see around that topic?
Yeah, I track this quite closely, as you probably can imagine, and we're at a very interesting state. I'll start with kind of a global comment. The mining network, and I'm talking mainly about the hardware infrastructure. We can talk about pools and all that maybe separately, but we'll focus on kind of the hardware side. We were fat. There's no other way to put it other than we were fat. And I think we all saw this meteoric rise in hash rate, especially over the last 5 years. So if you plot that, you see this just exponential growth curve, and it peaked last October. And it's fallen pretty precipitously since that point. And I think some people are concerned about that, but I think it's just, as I said, the network got overbuilt. Time permitting, we could go and talk about why was it overbuilt. But it's healing. Like, hey, we're the mining network's kind of in the gym. We're losing weight. We're getting fit. And it kind of sucks while you're in that process, right? but at the end of it, I think we're going to be stronger and more fit and better ready for the future. A couple facts, though. I shouldn't say facts because I think, as we all know, the mining network everything in the mining network is an estimate, right? So even when we talk about global hash rate falling, that is models, because we really don't know. Like we're just guessing based on the pace with which blocks are being produced against a certain difficulty level. We're mathematically saying, well, it looks like hash rate is here or here. And so but we've lost something on the order of 20 to 25% of the hash rate. And I think most people, if you're into Bitcoin, you're aware of that. But what you probably haven't done is maybe peeled back the onion one layer further. So like my estimate is the network has gone from about 7 million systems of various sizes, right? From S19s to S21s, et cetera, from about 7 million to maybe just over 5 million. So we've lost probably at least 2 million systems in this process. So, but we've also lost my estimate was last fall, the entire Bitcoin network was using about 200 terawatt hours of annualized energy. So that was the annualized consumption. And I think we're about 165 now. So we've lost about 35 terawatt hours of energy capacity. But a sidelight of that is that represents almost exactly 0.5% of global electricity. So the network right now is, right at that pace. And I believe that we are spending collectively, all the mining organizations in the world, somewhere between $7.5 and $8 billion annually on electricity. So that's our budget. We're on pace this year to do about $10.6 to $11 billion in revenue. So that's not very good, by the way, because that gap of roughly $3.5 to $4 million, or no, maybe $3 to $3.5 million, is still have to cover all the other overhead non-energy expenses of running an operation, right? The depreciation and the interest and all that. So what's happening is there is a rapid obsolescence of the older equipment, probably at a much more advanced rate than anybody expected. So outside of, very, very low cost operations, anything from like an S19K Pro, which is not that old of a system, on down is essentially out of play. Unless you are an operator that has, let's say, sub 3 cent per kilowatt energy, all that sort of stuff is out of play. And that's certainly hurting people, hurting operators, because this is not an obsolescence that we thought was going to happen now. I think a lot of us, maybe that had, like, for instance, S19K Pros, were hoping we might eke them out all the way up, into the vicinity of the next halving. But we're seeing 18, 20 months early them having to be decommissioned.
Interesting. And what is the time span on the reduction of miners? Was that in the last half year? What was that?
Since October. I should have been more specific about that. Yeah. So really in about a 10-month period, 9 to 10 month period, that's what we've lost.
Is that also like due to just price action of Bitcoin?
Well, there's two factors. One certainly is the hash price, right? So, and that's a reflection. The hash price going down is a reflection of two things: the price of Bitcoin going down and the fee market being essentially non-existent. So, we're at, outside of the first year or two of Bitcoin, when Bitcoin really didn't have really much value, we're at the worst hash prices in history. So I've been doing this 10 years, and by far the worst conditions. But the second factor is, of course, the influence of AI. And so I mentioned the drop of about 35 terawatt hours of energy capacity. And a lot of that has moved over to support AI data center sort of stuff. And we've seen the large miners, at least the public ones, Riot, CleanSpark, Iron, like these class of miners, they're really not miners. If you go to their websites, you will see that you'll be hard pressed to even find the word Bitcoin on their website. Like they still mine a lot of Bitcoin, but a lot less than they used to. They don't position themselves that way. You'll see AI, infrastructure, energy. Like when you look at their website and the way they position their company, it's very distant from Bitcoin. Almost like they're intentionally trying to do that. And I think so. I think that they're hoping to catch the tailwind of all of the AI stuff, and some of them have been successful. It's probably also noteworthy, when I talked about the network being fat, that's where the fat was primarily. That these companies, I won't pick on any one of them, but collectively they way overbuilt the network. They had too much liquidity, too much access to capital. They had learned that if they spent that money on the capital, that they got a positive reaction in terms of market cap. And even though they were operating at a loss, they continued to pour the money in because the shareholders would respond. And obviously that's not good. I mean, I think when because what happens is a small operator that doesn't have access to the same capital can get squeezed out because they can't get access to the equipment itself. Like we saw a lot of that in like 2022 and even into 2023, where if you were a small operator and your only choice was maybe to pay $8,000, $10,000, $12,000 for an S19, 3 or 4x what the appropriate price was, and if you did spend the capital, you had no hope of recovering that capital. But the big guys had swallowed up all the supply, and so it really was not a survival of the fittest, at least defining fittest as the companies that were the best operators. It was a survival of those with the deepest pockets. And that's not really good, right? I think you ultimately what you want is in a healthy market, you want the people who are best at it to be the ones that win and go forward. So, but I think what's happened, like when we see this hash rate decrease, my estimate is that the public companies have gone from somewhere between like 35 to 38% of global hash rate down into the high 20s, like 27 to 29% of global hash rate. And that's really good for other reasons too, decentralization and, just the overall health of the network. Because if the trend had gone the other way and they start pushing up toward 50, 60, 70%, which certainly could have happened, then we have to start worrying about capture, especially since so many of them were U.S. public companies. Like government capture and regulatory pressures could have changed the equation quite a bit, and immutability and censorship resistance and these Bitcoin fundamentals start to get concerning. So I think this, again, I kind of started with like this whole thing is, I think, very healthy for the network.
Really interesting. We talked about, I think last time we have been on like a year ago or something like that. We talked a lot about the decentralization of the network and how important it is that we have those different sizes of miners, the big ones, the smaller ones. I think like rabbit and horses. I think something like that.
Rabbits, horses, and elephants. Yes, correct.
Yeah, rabbit, horses, and elephants. Is that basically what you're right now seeing, that we get a better distribution across those 3 different sizes?
Yes. We've seen, while the elephants are shrinking, less elephants, we've seen a really rapid rise in the rabbits. And now there's still very small percentage of the overall network, but a lot of people running everything from bit axes to, one small machine. I think a lot of the things that have happened in the community, with controversy over version, V30 and the knots and the BIP 110 and all those sort of things, I think have invigorated some of the plebs. And so I think we have a lot more of those. But we also, at the horse size, companies like mine, which fit into, we develop sites in that horse class size, a few hundred kilowatts to several megawatts. Like that's kind of what I define as a horse class size. There's been an explosion in that area as well. I think we're seeing more and more off-grid development. That's something we're very focused on. And small on-grid sites, where people find a niche, a town of 3,000 people in a small town in Montana, and they find an opportunity to get a megawatt or 2 there. But they're sites that are much too small for an elephant to ever pay attention to. but you have to find, if you want to get into the business or expand in the business, like my advice to everybody right now is if you're thinking about a new site, then your energy cost, which is usually the starting point, better be 4 cents or less. Like if you can't get access to energy at that rate, then I would not place the bet. But those opportunities do exist in little pockets, whether they're like off grid, which is some of the stuff we do, where we own a hydro plant or we buy a natural gas well, and we exploit that, but at a small scale, or on grid, where maybe you're going to a small community, like I said.
It's so interesting because with the whole debate with Corvus or not, I see a lot more people being interested in, first of all, running a node, but also running miners. I haven't seen that amount of people being excited about talking about nodes and miners than ever before, which is really interesting in a bear market where we are 50% down from the all-time high.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for those that don't know, while I'm the CEO of Barefoot Mining, I'm also on the board and an investor in Ocean. I like people to always understand that about me, right? So I have that built-in bias. But what Ocean did is created a product called Datum, and the basis of Datum was to allow the individual participant in the pool the option to create their own template. And it's empowering to the small, actually to all miners, right? Because if what you do is I'm not saying it's wrong, but if you have whatever hash power you have, if you point it at Antpool or you point it at Foundry, essentially what's happening is they are leasing that hash power from you and paying you for leasing the hash rate. That's essentially that business model. And so they're making the decisions about what transactions go in blocks, and they're also taking risk, by the way, about whether or not in a given period of time they win a certain number of blocks or don't win a certain number of blocks. You get paid in a consistent manner, but you kind of give up what I consider to be the fundamentals of mining in doing so. And what Datum does is it says, hey, you as an individual, no matter how big you are, you can build the exact block template you want. You can decide if you want to signal for like something like BIP 110. You can decide if you want to filter out certain transactions. These are, I think, core tenets of what it really means to be a miner. And because I believe that the purpose of a miner, I think if you ask most people, what is the purpose of a miner? They would say, well, to make Bitcoin. And I would say, no, I'm going to make a subtle change to that. The purpose of mining is to produce block space, and we get paid in Bitcoin. And so that subtle change, I think if you start thinking about it and you think of yourself as a producer of block space, then you want to do that. Like you want to be the one that controls the block that you're hashing, and exert your rights and your power and your authority to express yourself, because we have limited ways in Bitcoin. Again, because the BIP is kind of active right now, we have limited ways in which we can express ourselves. There's no actual voting or referendum. So miners have a tool to kind of signal. That's what it's called, right? And nodes have a way to signal. And we'll probably talk about it later. And in the end, you really have the power to decide if you accept blocks from the rest of the network or not, and what what you want your node to recognize as Bitcoin, and if you're a miner, what blocks you're going to accept and try to build the next one on top of. Those are big things.
We Bitcoiners always preach not your keys, not your coins, but we're giving away all our data to the big tech servers. Your passwords, your identity, your accounts. That's why I personally switched away and started using Proton Pass. Everything is end-to-end encrypted, so not Proton and not anyone else can read your data. And look how simple this is. I just click here once on the login button and I automatically get the passkey sign-in from Proton. With just one click on it, I'm signed in. And of course, it also stores all the two-factor authentication codes. And if my credentials ever show up in a data breach, it warns me so I can act very fast. If you care about holding your own Bitcoin, you should also care about holding the control of your own data. It's the same fight. And the best part is you're not sacrificing your convenience. It's privacy and security by default, and you can start for free right now. And if you want to upgrade to Proton Plus, you get that for just $1 for your first month. Link is in the description and in the pinned comment down below. So go to proton.me/pass/Robin Seyr. Make sure you close your digital front door. It takes you 5 minutes and €0 to start with. Again, that's proton.me/pass/Robin Seyr. There's two interesting directions I want to go with. I'll start with the pool question. As you mentioned, there's like 3 different sizes of miners, like the rabbits, horses, and elephants. What role do pools play into that field of decentralization in the mining space?
Well, right now they play a huge role. I think ideally they play no role. Like that's I think what the goal should be. And because in reality, what is the purpose of a pool? The purpose of a pool is to mitigate risk for individual miners. In reality, so that's the charter of a pool, I think, by definition. But it's kind of morphed in a way. And by really 2 pools, or 2 pools controlling a little over half of the network and probably 5 pools controlling 80 to 90% of the network. What happens is, and those pools also not doing what Ocean does, at least for right now, which is giving the individual miners their own template creation capability. It means that almost all the blocks produced by the network come from just 5 entities. So this is actually a very interesting point, and I don't want to take too big of a tangent right now, but like there are these big debates like, do filters work or not, right? Well, my belief is that when only 5 organizations create all of the templates, whether filters work or not is completely dependent on the behavior of just 5 organizations. So they could work wonderfully if those 5 organizations enforce them. They wouldn't stop, for instance, spam, but they would make it very expensive because only a small percentage of blocks would be accepted. But on the other hand, if they accept the spam or most of the spam, then of course it's going to be inexpensive and pass through. If instead you have thousands of template creators spread across all of the hash rate, well, then I guess we would find out how the real network felt about it, but we don't know right now. And that, by the way, I know I'm off on a tangent. That's part of my disagreement with Core, who kind of gave up, and my contention to Core, which I've expressed to them, is like, hey, I believe they made a decision that it didn't matter, that you could kind of open up op return and kind of open up all this stuff up because history was showing there's just nothing was working. And my comment was, well, you gave up too early and you based it on too small a sample size of a very specific period in history. And 5 or 10 years from now, we could have a very, very different situation as datum and stratum V2 become more prevalent within the community. And I don't wish this, but maybe Foundry goes out of business, or Anpool goes out of business, or F2 Pool goes out of business, and we see a reshuffling of who the big pools are. Then this landscape could be completely different. So the answer is that we have. You asked about the role of pools in decentralization. The answer is, as a network, we have given them a tremendous amount of power, and we have allowed the centralization. And at this point, the community doesn't. This is probably a disappointing part. The community has not felt largely compelled to rebel against it. So in the past, when some of the pools, goes back, let's say 10 years, when some of the pools would start getting too big, the network would say, oh, we don't want this pool to get too big. And they would literally shut them down. There was one called Ghash that essentially went from almost 50% of the network to nothing 18 months later because of that fact.
Is it now harder because the community is 10x or 100x the size than it was in 10 years ago?
I think it's harder. I think that the knowledge level of the community itself about how Bitcoin works and what these risks are is lower. Like they just don't, have the same, and that's natural, by the way. I think in any technology adoption curve, you may remember I came from the personal computer industry, right? And so when I started in the personal computer industry, this would be back in the 80s, or early to mid 80s. Anybody that was working on a personal computer had superior knowledge of a personal computer. Everybody was open, was comfortable getting the screwdriver out and getting in there, and we would change jumper wires and dip switches, and it was like fun for us that were involved then. 15 years later, people just hit the on button. They didn't know what a device driver was. They didn't know what an interrupt was, or a DMA channel, or like any of these things. And so that's just natural. So, but it's not necessarily good. And one indicator of that, by the way, is as Bitcoin adoption has increased, node running has decreased. There are literally less, at least listening nodes now than there were several years ago.
Interesting. Yeah, it's like we are getting from an industry where I imagine when you got into Bitcoin in 2011, 12, 13, 14, there's only a very small select people. You have to gather your information mostly yourself. There's not hundreds of podcasts and books and articles and blog and Twitter communities that help you with that. And so naturally you have users that have a really good grip on what Bitcoin is because they have to, otherwise they couldn't do it even in the first place. And also I heard all those stories because I came into Bitcoin 2020, so also already 6 years ago, but it was already a developed area. I was able to buy Bitcoin easily. There was podcasts around it. There was YouTube videos, all of those things. 10, 15 years ago, depending on where you lived, it was hard to even buy Bitcoin. There was no exchanges or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I came in 2017, and I was kind of right at the cusp of kind of where you said that, where the podcasts were coming out, but things like the Bitcoin Standard Book hadn't been released yet. I think that was 2018 or 2019. But there was an explosion of information that was starting to come. I think in that 2018, 2019, 2020 is kind of when it started to proliferate. And so it got easier. But it also, almost everybody in the early days had, like I said, a reasonable technical literacy. And again, you had to, right? To run the Bitcoin client back in 2011, let's say, or 2012. I mean, even now you're dealing with largely command line prompts and things like that that are very intimidating. Even like for me, I don't say intimidating, but like, oh, okay, when I'm going to set up a new node, it takes a little time, and I enjoy it. I don't have a problem with it, but I have to think. It's not intuitive. There's not a GUI. There's not like it takes some work. I think like people like Start9 and FutureBit and some of those, they're doing better and better jobs of making these things easier for people. But we're still a long, long way from comparing, for instance, setting up a Bitcoin node to if you buy a new MacBook or you not buy a new PC. Like the amount of time it takes from when you open the box to when you're functional and comfortable is way long. When you, I happen to be a Mac user now, but if I buy a new MacBook, let's say, I'm using it in like 10 minutes, and all I had to do was answer a few very basic questions, maybe plug in a Wi-Fi password. That's pretty much it. An iCloud password and a Wi-Fi password, and boom, that's it, right? So anybody, even with low technical literacy, they're in. And I think that's an issue for Bitcoin, and it pushes people into the, well, quote unquote, paper Bitcoin stuff. Whether that's an ETF, an investment in a digital asset company, those sort of things, I think, appeal to those people as a result of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I made the comparison in Prague on stage of like how the car got developed and how different the car was in the beginning and how different the car is now. We went from basically it being without a lamp, without a roof, without AC, without all those things that we're now used to. It was basically just like a small engine and 3 tires, and it was very slow. Human can run was running faster than a car could run. It was actually also like if the first car would have ran in the marathon, that the new, I forgot his name, the new marathon runner that was under two hours, the new marathon runner was able to run faster for longer than the first car that came out, which is an interesting. I
didn't know that. That's a great tidbit.
It's crazy if you think about that. But now we have literally cars that you can order on your phone, that you step in and you don't even have to touch the steering wheel anymore. It's that crazy of a development. And the first car was probably having all sorts of problems that you as a user have to deal with, and then we have the ecosystem around the car of like, we have to build the gas stations of all the things that you need to operate a car. We have to pave the roads and those things. So I thought of that comparison, which is interesting because I think we are very early stage still in Bitcoin when we think about the ecosystem and where we are. How do you think is, like, I don't know if you have ever thought about the car comparison, but where do you think we are in this like Bitcoin ecosystem and how we are slowly building everything out for Bitcoin to be used by even more people?
Well, if we're going to compare it to cars, I'm not sure we're at the point where the Model T has been invented yet, which is, the first mass-produced automobile. If I use my world, which was the personal computer world, and I know you're younger, Robin, but we're probably at the point where maybe Microsoft is releasing early versions of Windows, but they suck. And so most people are still using DOS, which is, all command line stuff. That was an era I lived through. And what I find interesting at a minimum, but to a certain degree concerning, is if we look at the development community, I understand why. So if you talk to the devs, things like covenants, CTV, creating new op codes, exploiting taproot better, like these sort of things are all. I'm just trying to give basically these are all technically cool things. They're exciting as a developer. But even if they're implemented, in my opinion, they don't move the needle tremendously, on an adoption standpoint. There are use cases, but I'm not sure there's somebody out there saying, how do we make it easier to run a node? How do we make it easier to configure a node? How do we make it less intimidating? These sort of things. And because we're open source, in the way that the devs work, I don't want to say it's a flaw, but it's maybe a gap, and kind of I would hope at some point somebody steps in to fill it, where the focus is on, as I said, moving adoption. So when I was, I'm using the PC as an example, but what we started to do, I ran a really large development organization in the PC market. We had, I had over 500 engineers. And what we learned was in the early 90s, very early 90s and late 80s, all the engineers, all our engineers were PCB designers and firmware designers and those sort of things. And they were really considered kind of the creme de la creme of the engineering team. But by the late 90s, we had added what was called the human factors engineering group. And they ended up being some of the most highly compensated and most important engineers, because that was the transition, right? They were the people that, for instance, when you opened the box of the new PC, they thought about things Apple's very good at it. How does the keyboard feel? What's the tactile feedback of the when you press the on button or off button, do you get the right response? Do you get a click? Do you get some resistance that lets you know what's happening? For instance, you're in Austria. A company like BMW has always been known as one of the best in the world at those sorts of things. They think about things like, okay, not just does the door close properly, but what is the sound of the door? Do you get the proper audible feedback and tactile feedback when you close the door? And that's a whole specialty. There's a whole group of engineering that's focused on that. And as far as I know, there's nobody in Bitcoin that does something analogous to that.
It's hard to find. Yeah, we the optimization level from one of the first cars to having now cars not only driving themselves and all of those things, but having sound engineers that just engineer how does it sound like if you are closing the door. It's crazy what thought process, does it sound luxurious? Does it sound like something nice that you want to close, or any like cheap dough that you can just slap. It makes a huge difference once you pay attention. But it's crazy that there is a company that pays attention to that very small detail.
Yes. Yes. And the reason they do is the company strategically, BMW is known as a luxury brand. I think it's one of the highest quality, it's associated with being perceived as one of the highest quality brands. Is the company knows that they get to charge a premium for that. They know what BMW stands for, and they ultimately look at that monetarily and say, yeah, it's worth us, one, having the engineering team that focuses on those, and two, when they come in and say, well, the door is going to cost $4 more to build, but this is what we're, this is the difference that $4 will make. They can say, well, ultimately that $4 plus something we do with the windows, something we do with the exhaust, something we do with the steering wheel, etc., maybe collectively costs $800 or $1,000, but we get to charge $10,000 more because we did that. And in Bitcoin, because the development guys are not like, they don't really have a specific measurement upon which it's not profitability, it's not adoption, it's kind of the nature of open source and the way that this is, but it's I guess for lack of a better term, a weakness too. And I think, at some point the community has to say, we demand some of these things. We're, by the way, we're probably willing to fund some of these things as well, and it may be, I'm just throwing a name out there. It may be that a company like Swan or River or Coinbase says like, hey, we need more people buying Bitcoin. And like Swan as an example, always promotes self-custody. River promotes self-custody. So maybe they say, well, we're going to invest in some members of the development team, but we're going to ask them to focus on this area because they have an economic benefit from it. But I think it's going to take something like that because, like when I was at Gateway, the company I was at, I was the chief technical officer, but we had the support of the CEO and the support of the head of marketing and the head of sales. Like everybody was in agreement that we were going to focus on ease of use and making it warm and friendly and like those sort of things. And hopefully that we can get there with Bitcoin. By the way, same thing, by the way, in mining, that we need to make it easier for people to buy a mining machine and get it up and running. Like that shouldn't just pick on the nodes, right? Like that there's more than just the nodes and the Bitcoin client.
Yeah, I think the UX or the user experience of all of Bitcoin from most angles sucks. So I think
there you go. That sums it up.
Yeah,
yes, it sucks.
Like all of them, we have to improve. But it's early stage. I think we sometimes forget how early Bitcoin still is because it's been around now for like 15, 16 years. But for such a huge revolution that what Bitcoin represents, it's not that old.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Robin, because I'm going to go back to my earlier point. Like we have to be careful. And again, I'm saying this to the devs to a certain degree, if any of them are listening. Like, be careful about looking at Bitcoin's history and drawing definitive conclusions about the behavior of the network or the behavior of the community. As I said, like, we only have 5 mining pools today, and they dictate and have for several years what goes into blocks. So filters work or didn't work based on really 5 organizations. Well, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we might have a different 5 big pools, or maybe we don't have 5 big pools. Maybe it's more distributed, or maybe SV2 and Datum are in place. So even if there are only 5 big pools, the template choices have been distributed to tens of thousands of people. So I think it's very dangerous. That's what I'm saying, like, to think that we know what will happen. It's just like, it applies in a lot of areas too. Does the 4-year cycle exist? Well, we've been through a few 4-year cycles, a few 4-year periods. They define a pattern that will extend forever? We don't really know. We just saw something that, like, the reversal, kind of, even to bring it back to where we were, hash rate went up for essentially with no reversals other than the China mining ban from 2009 to the end of 2025. And now it's gone the other way. So if you look back and you listen to podcasts and people talking, I think the belief was hash rate's going up forever, that it'll never go down, but it did. And I've made this prediction a couple times, but I'll say it again. I don't think hash rate's going to go up again until after the halving. I think we're going to sit in this window of 800 to 950 exahashes for the network, and I don't think we're going to break out of it for 2 years at least.
What is the public mining? Is it mostly because of the public miners?
Well, that's a big part of it. I think that I wrote another one is, I wrote an article several years ago. I don't know if we've ever talked about it, Robin, on something I hypothesized on called the miner's trilemma. And the miner's trilemma says that there's 2 tenets of the miner's trilemma. The first is that amongst energy, infrastructure, which means the systems or rigs, and capital, those 3, at any one point in time, one of the 3 will always be hard. And the second tenet is, if one that is hard starts becoming easy, it forces difficulty on one of the other 2. So in other words, like I said, you always have this. So it's capital, systems, and energy. Well, we're at a point right now where energy, because we have competition, especially like the AI world and the data center world have become hugely competitive for energy. Energy's hard. It's going to stay hard for at least a couple of years, until eventually I think a bubble will burst in the AI infrastructure market. Capital is insanely difficult. Nobody wants to put money into mining right now, like big guys or little guys. It's really hard. However, right now, systems are insanely cheap. So like what we're doing at Barefoot, we're buying a lot of used equipment right now. And we have some really low cost operations. We have several sites where they're sub 3 cents per kilowatt hour. But we're buying, for instance, we just bought some this week. We bought several used S21 XPs 270s. So, and we're buying them for 70% less than we bought the same unit a year ago new. So obviously we're comparing new to used, but 70% decrease in less than a year. So right now, if you talk to the people trying to sell new equipment, though, like it's just a vacuum. Nobody is buying new equipment. There's such a plethora of used equipment on. So we have these factors. If you look at the next 2-year horizon, there's not much energy. If you want to expand, good luck finding energy. You have to do what we do, which is find a site and produce it yourself. That's really the only way at any sort of scale. Number two, you better have the money yourself or have a close network of investors, because it's going to be really hard to get any investment. Number three, I'm going to speculate on. If I'm Bitmain or WhatsMiner, the bigger makers, I'm shutting my production lines down. Like I'm running at next to zero. I'm taking the chip allocation I have, the wafer starts I have at TSMC and Samsung, and I'm selling them to the AI companies. I'm saying I don't want these chips because they're expensive. I don't have any customers. And I'm also going to slow down my R&D team on developing new products. And so I'm not saying they're not coming, but I think you're going to see a much slower rate at which new models come out. So all these factors compress the expansion of the network. And I'll also add the AI infringement on the power available to the network. I mentioned that number before, right? So we lost roughly 20% of the network power has gone away. I think we're going to lose even more. So even though the hash rate won't go down dramatically, in other words, we might lose another over the next year. We might lose another 10 or 20% of the power and drop, let's say, to 150 terawatt hours of annualized energy consumption. But the hash rate will stabilize, meaning that the energy that does exist, older systems will get replaced with better units, not necessarily new ones, but like what we're doing is we right now we're decommissioning like S19J Pros, 120s, and K Pros, and we're putting in 270s at some of our sites.
With Microseed, you can engrave your 12 or 24 word seed phrase, the entire seed phrase, onto a 1-inch small washer. Yes, just one washer. All 24 words on that one washer. You can hide that thing everywhere. And even better, you don't need to buy a new kit every time you have to get a new wallet. You can make unlimited backups because Microseed is not selling the washer. Microseed is selling the device that stamps the washer. You get the full kit with the device, with the washers, with the hammer, with everything you need to get started today, and you can make with that unlimited amount of backups. Go now to microseed.io. I finally and officially mine Bitcoin. This is not just something to stack more Satoshis, but it's most importantly also to support the network. Individual miners are the ones that keep the Bitcoin network decentralized. And by the way, you get KYC-free Bitcoin. That's why I use Simple Mining. I get an actual proper Bitcoin miner. They set it up for me. They repair it if it breaks down. And most importantly, they let me choose the pool and even connect my own full node. I'm completely sovereign and I'm completely in control, and I can sign up with Ocean. No account needed. I just give them a Bitcoin address and then there's mining going on. No KYC, nothing. So if you're ready to mine Bitcoin, go to simplemining.io, tell them you come from Robin, and let's mine Bitcoin together. Crazy. It's, if you think about, there's one more thing I want to touch on, because we're already slowly getting to the 1 hour mark. What do you think is the game theory? Because we talked about that also, I think, last time a little bit. The game theory around wanting block space. Because this is a thing we always talk about, like buying Bitcoin and how important this is, and like we talk about it on company level, we talk about it on even nation state level, like strategic Bitcoin reserve. How important is that for bigger institutions, bigger companies, nation states, of wanting to control block space?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I'm going to say is I believe it is so important that it rivals Bitcoin itself. And I know this sounds crazy in the face of a period of time in which blocks are so empty and fees are so low. But I think if we can think about it more clearly by taking ourselves out of today and moving forward, let's say 10 years. So if we think about 10 years from today, if you're a person like me that believes that we will continue to see adoption grow, we'll see further institutionalization of Bitcoin, which I know I'm not saying I love it. I'm just saying that what I think is going to happen. Then the way the Bitcoin network works, there is a gap with the needs of the bigger institutions and the nation states. And the gap is that if they don't control any block space, then what we are saying to them is, let's say Bank of America wants to send 1,500 Bitcoin from the U.S. arm to a branch in Austria, just as an example. So in the fiat system, if they were trying to send an equivalent amount of USD, it would be very simple. Like they would know how long that was going to take and what the costs were associated with that. In the Bitcoin network, both of those are unknowns. So they don't know. If they broadcast that transaction and they offer a fee, they have no idea when it will resolve, when it will get confirmed, and whether or not they've offered enough money. And do they have to RBF it? Do they have to bump the fees? Like they don't know these things. And so if that's true on one transaction, that's true on all transactions. And it means that they can't, if they're doing a substantial part of their business in Bitcoin, they're giving loans in Bitcoin, they're moving money around internationally in Bitcoin, they have deposits in Bitcoin, they're paying dividends in Bitcoin, like all these sorts of things which require base layer resolutions. Well, they can't even model the business. It's very difficult. So there has to be some mechanism to have a known response time and a known cost of doing business. So the only way for them to get that control is to either be a miner themselves and control a certain number of blocks, or buy their way into blocks, coming to a company that does control block space, and pre-buying it, having some sort of preferential treatment. Like I know these are things that Bitcoiners typically don't like, But there's a gap between the way financial institutions work and big corporations work and the way the Bitcoin network works. And if those solutions aren't provided, then we don't hyper Bitcoinize. Like, we can't hyper Bitcoinize without solving that problem. And they have to have, like right now in big companies, I came from a former Fortune 200 company. This is like the time of year when big corporations start trying to set budgets for the next year. So, like, what budget would they have for Bitcoin fees? I don't know, from their marketing groups, trying to set up their strategy to market to new customers. If they're gonna have Bitcoin be a major part of that, what service level are they going to be able to guarantee people? This needs to happen. Now, at the nation state level, which you mentioned, this is where I think especially access to the network is more important than the Bitcoin strategic reserve. And the reason is that, I've said this publicly, so I'll use an example. A country like Israel is probably by almost anybody's measure controversial. So if I was Netanyahu, the head of Israel, what I would do right now is I would go make sure that I had block template control over, let's say, 0.5% of the Bitcoin network. And the reason is that if at some point the whole world basically hates me and I'm kicked off of the SWIFT system and I'm kicked off of any other mechanism to do international commerce, that I would still have a mechanism to sell oranges and buy oil and do commerce through Bitcoin. So having control over block space is analogous to national sovereignty ultimately. That if you're a nation state, especially a small to medium-sized nation state, and you do not have control over some block space, then you are always at the threat of international sanctions or bans crippling you economically. But Bitcoin, just like it does to the individual, it also does to the nation state. So I think when we look at that 10-year horizon, the result of that is that I think we're going to see large financial institutions mining, or maybe even collectively working in a pool that prioritizes their transactions. I think we're going to see nation states mining, again, maybe even in small collectives regionally. And I think it's going to help decentralize the network in a weird way, that we'll have a lot more parties that want to mine. And I think that helps decentralize it, even though they may be a lot of people the Bitcoin community historically thinks of in villainous terms.
So in a way, there will be companies like Strategy, Fidelity, Coinbase, BlackRock, and Co. being interested in mining as they are. If Bitcoin plays out, all of those companies probably will be huge financial institutions.
Correct. And maybe a few legacy ones that are trying to as well. It may be, I mentioned Bank of America or Deutsche Bank or Mitsui in Japan or somebody like that also gets into it. And if there are companies that really move to a Bitcoin standard, like if you're a large, imagine a Fortune 500 company that's operating on a Bitcoin standard, they'll probably either mine or they will buy preferential position from another miner or pool.
One last topic I want to get into with you today is the BIP 110. I think we talked about it on here and there on some places in this episode, but it's a very polarizing one, I have to say, a very emotional one. And I think I told you before we started recording, I almost get a little bit tired of it because there's a lot of emotional load on both sides, and I like to talk with as many people as possible. So I've had core people on like James and Lobb, Stephen Rivera, and other people. I had Bitcoin Mechanic just on, I think this or last week, and other people from the Knots camp. And it's just very interesting if you are in that space and putting our content in that space. The whole social layer of Bitcoin and the debates that are going on. How do you, maybe twofold, how do you see core versus knots? And some people see it as a separate issue. Some people see it as a tied in issue. But how do you see the BIP 110 debate?
I'm much more moderate, I would say, than like you mentioned, some of the people. I think I know basically all of them, and consider most of them my friends on both sides. And that's, by the way, been hard for me personally, I would say, is when it has become so divisive, and I find myself having relationships personally and business-wise with people on both sides, and trying to not be forced into disliking somebody over something, or losing a friend because of it. But so be it, I guess, if it happens. I support it, and I was disappointed with the process and communication by which we landed at Core V30. And I personally don't think anybody inside Core was doing something intentionally malicious. I mentioned to you already, there are things that influence their decision. I mentioned the filter thing. There's more to it than that. But I said, hey, I don't think you've like, when I say you, I think the Core people took as definitive a position that there was nothing they could do when, and they used too narrow of a case to justify that. So I was disappointed, but I was even more disappointed not in the decision than I was in the process and the communication from Core. I think BIP 110 is a response to that. The movement toward knots was a response to that from a material percentage of the community. I hope that Core heard that. I do think you mentioned knots. I hope that knots continues to be a viable client option going forward, but I hope other clients are developed as well. I personally think we need a different model, and that we shouldn't think of Core as the definitive place by which Bitcoin clients get developed and the only place in which policy gets set. So I hope other clients are developed, and I hope they get used, because unless they get used, then there's no power distribution from them. So it's too long, but I can explain how the personal computer architecture, which I was part of both developing and moving forward, we had some of the same issues. There was no central standards body, and competitors in that case Gateway and Dell and Toshiba and HP, and we had to come together to evolve the standard. And I think that Bitcoin could learn from that. I'm disappointed it has gotten to the point, as I said, where it is, because I think it's gone overboard. I'm very happy we're probably, I think we're a little less than 2 weeks away from this thing being, I shouldn't say over, but either BIP 110 activates or it doesn't. I supported BIP 110. I was actually the first company to create a block signaling for it. Barefoot was. That said, I do not view it as existential. I think people on both sides, I think if it activates, we'll be fine. But if it activates and becomes the dominant chain, then there's a ticking clock. It's a temporary protocol change, tightening, temporary protocol tightening, and then we have to decide what happens after a year. And I'm hoping that we can settle some of these internal conflicts inside that year. If it doesn't become the dominant chain, I think it will very quickly become a very small chain with not much support for it. But I think the same thing needs to apply. I hope that if that happens, and I'll be honest, I think that's the most likely case. I hope that the people that have supported or been anti-BIP 110 don't use it as a way to bash all the people who were pro-BIP 110. And by the way, vice versa. I mean, I think that's childish and immature, and I hope that we reach that point. Now, the reality is all of those fights are within a really small group of people. Yesterday I talked to somebody that is a whale class Bitcoin holder and just heard about BIP 110 yesterday and called me about it. So a really large percentage of people don't even know this. This is a small world. And I personally think that, and what I have to do as a miner is there's an activation height. It's 961,632, the block height. And from that point forward, there is a possibility of a chain split, probably a likelihood of a chain split. But I think within 1 hour, 6 to 10 blocks, it's going to be very apparent which side is heavier and essentially what we're going to follow going forward. And so, like, I, as a miner, and if you're out there as a miner, when we're getting close to that block height, make sure that you're in a position where you can quickly flip from either supporting BIP 110 or not supporting BIP 110, called flip the bit, right? And signal one way or the other, because if you're on the wrong side of it, you're on a minority chain, you could be mining something with little to no value.
Interesting. Is it, you mentioned it, but like, how likely do you think it is that it will activate at this point? Or can you even see that right now?
The big thing, Foundry put out a survey to its folks. So, and to their credit, by the way, I think they did the right thing. They're the biggest pool in the world, and they went and sent a survey to their users and said, hey, do you want us to follow BIP 110 or not? If Foundry follows BIP 110, then the likelihood of BIP 110 being the dominant chain gets extremely high. If Foundry doesn't, I think it's very low. So I think it all comes down to that. Because if Foundry goes, I think Ant Pool and F2 Pool and others, the game theory is such that they'll say, I don't want to go against Foundry, and so they'll build on whatever chain Foundry is building on. So I think it all comes down to that vote. If I was betting, I would bet that the vote will be against by the Foundry, knowing, I think, having a general idea of who would be mining with Foundry. I think they'll vote against, but you never know. I mean, they have some big Foundry. It's not one person, one vote. It's one terahash, one vote. Like it's proportional to how much hash rate you have with Foundry. So if I'm surprised, and like a lot of the big public miners run through the Foundry pool. So if a couple of them voted for it, so I guess in a weird way, it's really not even Foundry, which way Foundry goes. It's probably which way the pubcos go, because they dictate what will happen with Foundry.
But it's crazy that it comes down to that.
Yeah.
Like that seems like a sad state of affairs. Not like
it is
like what side you're on, like that, like one entity has that kind of like, or like even like a few bigger publicly traded companies within that organization or within that kind of cluster have that kind of vote is shouldn't be the case, right?
Yeah, but I'll come back to what we said earlier. I think we as a community kind of let that happen. We didn't distribute hash rate well enough. I would even put it on the, like, if I was a shareholder of, I'm just saying, like, let's say a company like Riot or CleanSpark, I would say, hey, why are you guys even using a pool? Why? Because they don't even need a pool, to be frank. Like the pool is to mitigate risk. But if you have, let's say, 3% of global hash rate, if you're a big enough company to have 3% of global hash rate, that means you're going to mine 3-4 blocks a day. So you don't have, and now granted, it might be some days you only get 1 and some days you get 6, but you're gonna have that average, and you should have the financial backbone to pull out that volatility. And by the way, save money on the fees. And but they don't. They like I said, I use the word abdicate. They've abdicated the power of mining to the pool. At least in this case, the pool is letting them vote. But yeah. So if I was a shareholder in some of those companies, I would have voiced my opinion, like, hey, as a shareholder, I want you to be a little more responsible and spread your hash rate out, and or take control of the template yourself. But here we are.
Which is an interesting thing, because I got asked that question of, like, if I have, let's say, not one miner running, but I have like 10 or a few more running, like, what is the number where my odds of hitting a block are so high that I, instead of joining a pool, I just do it myself? And if I hit one block, it's kind of like it sets off the cost for it way faster, way bigger. But what's the likelihood that I hit that? It's a funny, like, I don't know if you have, like, let's say 10 miners running or something like that. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be, a lot depends on, like, how much money do you have? What's your risk tolerance? How long can you sustain paying the electric bills and the overhead, waiting for it to happen? We can, obviously, it depends on what unit and where global hash rate is and all that, but like I'll give you an example though. We track for our operations. I have one of the operations. It's been the luckiest site of all time. It's a 1 megawatt site. It's been up for 3 years. It has 350 S19K pros in it. It's won 13 blocks. Like super lucky. It once won those 50. It once won 2 out of 3 blocks on the network from the same group of 350. So that's one of the benefits of, by the way, mining with Ocean. I don't know that any other pool lets you do this, but when you mine with Ocean, even though you don't get paid differently, if you won the block, like Barefoot being a contributor, and you can identify the exact machine that won it. Like we can go that. So in our operation, we have a special sticker that any machine that wins a block gets a special sticker, and we put the block height on, and there's like a little ceremony to thank the hashing gods for bestowing a block on us. So
that's a fun thing to do. It's like an employee of the month kind of thing.
Yep.
Love that. As we come closer to the end of the podcast, we have an end routine, as you might know from the previous appearances, where the previous guest is asking a question for the next guest without knowing who the next guest actually is. And the previous guest asked you the question: what's the single biggest barrier stopping everyday investors from getting into Bitcoin?
I think we still have a lack of knowledge about what it is and how it works. I think it's still largely in the general population looked at as kind of this speculative asset. They think about it like a stock, and they don't appreciate its core attributes. But I think all of us that have been on the journey for a while go through that process of where you have to go way back to the first principles, like what is money? How does money work? How is the current financial system not benefiting me or the general populace, and then build from there. And that's a hard one. It's a very difficult process. So I hope that we can get some of the larger media organizations and outlets to get a little more vocal about it. Even like back here, those of you who are watching, you can see like I have a Bloomberg feed up, Bloomberg financial feed, and they'll show the Bitcoin price several times every day. But I will be shocked if anybody ever comes on and talks about what Bitcoin is and how it works and what it does. And so, that'll be a great day if that changes.
Yeah, it's probably more in the bull market. So now in the bear market, it's people don't want to talk about it too much. There's less talking heads on the mainstream media. If it goes again up to all-time highs, we have more talking heads. It's name of the game. But it's even in the bull market, it's not a lot. And then the coverage is usually a little bit disappointing, but at least they're covering it. Just from the content perspective. But yeah, that's why we have decentralized media. We have many different heads in the Bitcoin space that writing articles, doing the things. I think that's for now a very good way, but we need more people, and we need the bigger outlets, and we need bigger people to cover it more often.
Yeah. More people should watch your show and listen to your show, right? That would help.
Like that would certainly help, not just me, but hopefully also Bitcoin. Thank you so much, Bob, for being on. Before I let you go, where can people find you, ask you questions, and reach out to you?
I'm on Twitter at boomer_BTC. You can learn about my company, Barefoot Mining, at barefootmining.com.
Awesome.
I also
Thank
have
you
a
so much.
show. I also have two shows. One called the Bitcoin Boomers that I do with Larry Lepard and Gary Leland. You can find us on all the YouTube and all the popular places. And then I have a solo show I do called Old Man Yells. So check that out too.
I love that name, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you.
The old man yells at Bitcoin, or about Bitcoin at this point.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Bob, for being on the podcast. Also, thank you so much for everyone that is watching and listening, for joining us today. As always, I'll be back. This content is for educational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial advice.